Welcome back to another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. 2024 IMSA season's officially underway, and both of us got to celebrate that with spending that time at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. So, if you bumped into either one of us while you were at the race, appreciate you guys saying hi. Nice to catch up with some of you at the track. But we got a little bit to unpack on today's episode. Stu, how are you doing tonight back in the chilly north?
That's actually not so chilly here. It was, we don't even have snow up here right now. So a little bit fortunate for that. But, it just before we got on, I thought, it's hard to believe that 2 weeks ago we were in the same spot right now, but just about to head out for the Rolex. Uh, what I would love to go back in time and just do it all over again.
Yeah, I every time I do a 24-hour race, and you might have seen my 4 a.m. Twitter rant about this. I have a love-hate relationship with 24-hour races, especially when I go to them. And that was my third 24-hour race in just over a year. If you do last year's Rolex 24, Le Mans last year, and then this year's Rolex. Really excited and looking forward to going to them when it's before the race, and then the start of the race, the first 8 hours or so, you're really hyped about it. 3 a.m. hits, you're just trying to get a little bit of sleep, and the last thing I quite frankly want to hear is a Ford Mustang GT3 going around the banks of Daytona. But we survived, and on that point, I have to ask you, because we didn't actually get to talk much before this episode. How far did you make it into the night?
Well, I wasn't planning on doing the
Yeah,
whole thing.
I didn't think so.
I knew that it was for my own well, if I wanted to stay in the relationship that I'm in, then I needed to be up and ready to do some other activities in Florida for a few days afterwards, and I didn't want to be a complete walking zombie for a few days. So I figured a few hours of sleep would do me some good. So we were able to catch some sleep, probably from about 2:30, and I think I woke up at 5:30 or so. So I think I got about like 3 hours of sleep, which I thought was a fine amount. I didn't feel that dead the following day, surprisingly. So I think that was planned from the beginning. But I think I don't remember if it was you that I was talking to about this, but I feel like if you stay up for the whole 24 hours, it's so much easier, or it'd make a lot more sense to do it at home, where once the 24 hours is done, you can have a nap pretty much right away afterwards, and and you're all set. Plus, you're not walking around at the track. There's not that sort of element that's affecting you as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about it, and I've never stayed up a full 24 hours of Daytona at home either. And actually, come to think of it, I'm pretty sure of all the years I've been watching that 24 hours of Daytona, which really dates back to 2009, although I guess I haven't been attempting to stay up for the entire time since probably 2015 or so. It's easier for me to stay up when I'm at the track. I don't know if it's just the moving around or having that many cars right next to you is the part that actually keeps me awake. I think when I'm at home and I'm on a comfortable couch, that's when I'll lose 6 hours.
Yeah.
But I will say, for my side of things, I made it a mission to not leave the track property at all this year. Usually for a 24-hour race, what I've done the previous two times is I go sleep out in a car out in the parking lot. This time around, didn't even go that far. I found a nice cozy patch of turf on the third level of the Daytona grandstands. Wasn't the only person with that idea.
Oh, is that the fake turf that they had?
Yeah, the fake turf over in
Nice.
like the Advent Hell Zone.
That's cozy.
And I used my camera bag as a pillow, which is not Tempur-Pedic quality, but it sufficed. And I used I just put my sweatshirt on because I got a little chilly at night. I'm not gonna, act like a tough ass Northeasterner here. And we made it through like an hour and a half of sleep, which was a little bit less than last year, and certainly way less than I got at Le Mans last year. But was back up and got to see the sunrise at Daytona, which is
Yeah.
always one of my favorite parts of that race, getting to see that Florida sunrise, which wasn't extraordinary this year, but didn't really disappoint at the same time. And I will say, Also great to see the battles on track at Sunrise as well,
Oh
both in
yeah.
the LMP, not in the LMP, in the GTP category and the LMP2 class. Had some pretty hefty battles going on for the lead in both of those categories right at Sunrise, and I was over in NASCAR Turn 3. Wouldn't really want it any other way. So, got a couple of people tuning into the show right now. Taurus, how's it going? The common face around here. Andrew Brodsky saying hello. We got Fluffy and Spendin as well. Are hotels near the track relatively easy to get around the Rolex 24, at least compared to the Daytona 500? Well, never been to the Daytona 500. Also, never booked a hotel to go to the Rolex. Stu, you might be able to help out with that one a little bit more, but I know it's definitely easier compared to Watkins Glen and Sebring.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we stayed in an Airbnb down on the beach, so it was a little bit. But that being said, I think I booked about 4 or 5 months out from the race, and there were rooms available in the hotels right by the track, but they were going for a pretty penny. You
Yeah.
definitely pay a premium if you want to be in a hotel room right beside the track for the Rolex.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate enough to just mooch off friends when I go down there and steal a spot on their couch. So the way I want to structure this, because the race was over a week ago, and I don't really think it's necessary for us to do a full rundown
Yeah.
of a 24-hour race that happened over a week ago. You're probably all caught up by now. If you didn't get to watch the race live, what I did want to do is just review some of my main takeaways. Now, full transparency, haven't gone back and watched the race, and if you know anything about attending an endurance race in person, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do when you're actually there in person and not unpacking everything with timing screens and a broadcast feed right in front of your face. But a couple things I want to go over, and we'll try to use that to discuss our opinions on the race. The first thing I noticed, and it was recorded as the highest ever attendance at the Daytona 24, at least in recorded history. And I think it really did feel like it this year. Admittedly, I got to the track a bit late. We were way off schedule the entire week getting to the track on time. And I didn't end up getting there until driver introductions were underway, which was after the parade that they do before the race. And the track was already pretty packed. And trying to find a seat in the grandstands last year wasn't easy by any means for the start, but this year felt especially tough. You and I were actually one section apart for the start of the race, way up in the 300, 400 levels of the grandstands, which was way up top at the entrance into turn one. And
Great
even up
viewing
there,
spot.
yeah, great viewing spot, but even up there, tons of people there. And the main thing that I noticed was not necessarily how busy the race was at the start and finish, but how many people stayed at night. And that was one of my key takeaways from the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It just felt like a lot of people refused to leave. And last year at Daytona, definitely felt a lot lighter at nighttime than we had this year. People were still lining the fences in the International Horseshoe at 12 o'clock in the morning. I was out at 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning to try to catch the sunrise. People were out and about in the camping areas. Really felt like a true 24-hour endurance race where nobody really sleeps at night. Except you and I guess.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we were the only ones that got any sleep there, that's for sure. No, there was some of the grandstands that are in the horseshoes as well. And I remember we were there. I can't remember around what time we were there, but we did a wander through the horseshoes pretty late at night, and there were a lot of people that were hanging around in those little bleachers that they have set up. So it was impressive to see the crowd there. Not gonna lie, there was especially when everybody was in the pit road area just prior to green flag for the grid walk and everything. It was packed. There's no doubt about that.
I did see a picture of the garage area on the race day morning, and I wasn't exactly regretting not being there because it looked like it was very hard to actually walk around at all. I don't know if you were there for that part of the race, or not race, but pre-race.
Yeah. When we showed up on Saturday morning, we did a quick pass through the garage area, and it was fine at that point. I think we got to the track at around 8 o'clock or so, maybe a little bit before that. And we did a pass through the garage, and we kind of came back around to do another pass through. And at that point, there were a ton of people that were pouring in, and by the end of that second sort of pass through, you were just inching your way through. It was very busy, but great to see all the fans out, and you love to see that kind of support for of course, one of the year's biggest races.
Right. When we did get the race underway, um, we weren't actually racing for all that much in the first hour. It seemed like it was a bit hectic. First thing we had was the GTD Forte Racing Lamborghini. Spun on the entrance to the bus stop, hit the wall inside the bus stop. Went back to green after that, and then immediately, I think 3 LMP2 cars crashed
Yeah.
in the same area. Well, not the bus stop, the Le Mans chicane. I'm sorry.
Oh yes.
And then immediately after that, I think before the yellow even came out, the MDK Porsche and GTD and the GTD Pro Lexus crashed going into the International Horseshoe. I mean, it's an hour one of a 24-hour race. Didn't really seem like people had that in the back of their minds at the start.
Yeah, it was a pretty messy opening. This carried on for like the first third of the race, I thought, really until the sun kind of set is when things started to clean up a bit, because there were some interesting incidents that were taking place. Lots of LMP3 incidents in the early going in, or LMP2 incidents in the early going in this one, kind of reminiscent of some of the LMP3 incidents that you would see, because there was also a pretty big shunt for the TDS Racing
Right.
entry as well. Stephen Thomas had a very hard hit coming out of the Le Mans chicane, and it ended their race. But yeah, no shortage of carnage in the early going.
Yeah, but altogether pretty clean in the GTP category
Yes.
for the beginning of the race. And the thing that I noticed, I think most people noticed right off the bat, especially in the daytime hours, was the pace of Cadillac versus Porsche. They really seemed to be the class of the field. It looked like from an early stage of the race, if we didn't see any mechanical issues from either one of those cars or manufacturers, that they would be the two who would probably see battling for the win at the end of the race. Spoiler alert. What do
Yeah.
you think ended up happening? Um, Acura and BMW seemed like they were on the back foot a little bit, especially Acura compared to the pace that they had last year. Just didn't really have the overall race pace. Now, they were still in it. I mean, there were points of the race where they were still up front and it managed to get a podium at the end of the race with the number 40 car. But I think a lot of that really came down to the attrition race that GTP ended up becoming. Looking back at the incidents now, both BMWs ran into either electrical or mechanical issues in the nighttime hours. And I know early on in the race, I was talking to you and I said, keep an eye out for the Porsches because I think the Porsches are really going to come alive at night. And you told me the BMWs actually were the surprise for you when it came to the nighttime hours.
Yeah, I thought prior to their mechanical issues that they were really starting to sort of turn things up a little bit as day turns tonight. Whether that was maybe the setup that they had favored some of the nighttime running a little bit more, or just the cooler temperatures maybe favored the car a little bit more. But yeah, I thought BMW was pretty impressive in the lead up to the issues that they experienced. Whether it was BMW improving, or Porsche and Cadillac sort of that front running pace just slowing down just a touch. It's hard to say, but yeah, I thought the BMWs looked much better, of course, than they did here last year. It was not a memorable Rolex for them in 2023, but yeah, I thought they looked pretty strong here, as I think it was kind of approaching the halfway mark of the race. And then unfortunately they hit their troubles.
Yeah. And not as heavy trouble as they faced last year in the race reliability wise, but I have to say now they are two 24-hour races under their belt. Their next 24-hour race is going to be Le Mans in June. And if I'm right in saying, I believe all 4 times or 2 times they've run with 2 cars. So all 4 entrants into 24-hour races have not made it through without reliability issues for BMW. So
Yep.
something they still have to keep their eye on too. I'd be interested to see how they follow that up at Sebring. At Sebring last year, they were in the hunt at the end, and if anything, you'd think Sebring would beat the cars up a little bit more than Daytona. But curious to see where they land in a couple months' time at Sebring. Also, if we want to talk about reliability,
Oh boy.
well, this is a good thing actually. Porsche prioritized in the off season their reliability upgrades with the 963,
Okay.
and if I'm not mistaken, again, it's a 24-hour race. Didn't catch every living second of that race, but I don't believe any of the Porsche 963s ran into a single reliability issue throughout the race.
Yeah, I think that is correct. I think they were the only manufacturer that didn't have any reliability issues that crept
With
in.
4 cars, mind you, the 2
Oh,
factory cars, the 2 customer cars, and not a single reliability issue. Add that on top of the pace that they were having. I would say that those off-season upgrades for reliability look to be proven pretty well right now, and I'm going to be interested to see how they fare at some of the longer endurance races like Sebring, Le Mans as well.
yeah. It'll be I think I heard this on the broadcast. I think they were talking about some porpoising that was going on with the Porsches down when they were up on the banking. I'm pretty sure it was with the Porsches. I could be wrong, but if that is the case, then it's probably something they'll want to try and address as much as they can within the rules, of course, heading into Le Mans, because you don't want to be porpoising down that very long straight.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely seen cars scraping under heavy fuel loads on the banking at Daytona. Didn't hear any report of porpoising, but again, I wasn't able to listen to the entire race.
I mean, this
Um,
could have just been me hearing things in the dead of night at
yeah, if it's
Daytona
one
too.
o'clock in
So
the morning, your mind starts hearing things. Um, the one thing that was really of note from Porsche, apart from winning, of course, was the number 6 Porsche in particular kept getting penalized throughout the race. I think this happened like at least 3 times, where they exceeded the maximum stint energy that's allocated by the BOP. Now, very weird to me that it was only occurring to one of the 4 Porsches. I think another one of them got a warning earlier in the race. I believe it was one of the customer cars. Can't remember if it was JDC or Proton off the top of my head. There was a report in SportsCar 365 that it was actually caused by the cars running over the curbs in the Le Mans chicane a little bit too hard and getting some air over those curbs, and it would just cause a momentary spike in the power output of the car. Like I said, bit weird that it happened numerous times. They did try to patch it in a software update in the middle of the race. And the last time I remember it happening was in the sunrise when the number 6 car was battling for the lead. And then ultimately they got another drive-through penalty for exceeding maximum stint energy. So, like I said, kind of a weird thing. The only real, not reliability, but just sort of struggle of note from Porsche during that race in the GTP category, and just something I thought was a little bit interesting given the fact that it happened a few times.
yeah, hopefully they'll get whatever issue that is sorted out, because that was, yeah, definitely a weird one to say the least.
Yeah. Talking about GTP a lot, I want to talk about LMP2, particularly Era Motorsport and CrowdStrike Racing. Put on a great show for us the entire race long, especially in the final hour of the race. Now, our guy, Connor Zilic, we had him on the podcast last time around.
Yeah.
And what a show that was from him, 17-year-old. I think the most impressive stint from him, in my opinion, was the early morning stint that he ran. And completely, I guess I would say dominant performance from him. Not really dominant, but a really nice performance from him, given the fact that it was his first outing in an LMP2 car. Also had Christian Rasmussen, I think, put the fastest overall lap in LMP2 across the entire race. They just had the slight edge over the CrowdStrike Racing car that time around.
Yeah, Connor did a really good job holding off Malte Jakobsen as well. I think
Yeah.
as part of that stint, they had a nice little battle, and he was under pressure for much of the stint that he was in for that morning run, and just did a good job of putting in a really clean and really fast run. And there's been a lot of talk about Connor coming out of that race, and definitely an impressive performance. I believe the second youngest person
Yes.
to win the Rolex 24.
Yep. Also, if you want to talk about additional classes, GTD Pro and GTD. probably the class that I least expected to be a real attrition race. We've seen
Yep.
previous Daytona 24s. I look back to 2017 where there were like 9 cars or 9 or more cars battling for the overall win in the final hours of the race. Not the overall, I keep GTLM win in the final hours of the race. But I think that class is really where we saw the most attrition. We saw some reliability woes from your local boys over at FAF. Ford and Corvette had not really the cleanest debut with their new GT3 cars. And the thing that really came of note to me was that Risi Competizione, a team that I don't think got a lot of talking about going on with them leading up to the race. Just sort of quietly there, a little bit off pace in qualifying, but was there for the entire 24 hours, didn't really run into any issues with the 296, and chalked up the first Daytona 24-hour win for that new Ferrari 296 GT3.
Yeah, the Ferraris looked strong across both the GTD Pro and the GTD classes. Conquest Racing picking up in GTD the Ferraris finished second, third, and fourth with AF Corsa Conquest and Triarci. So you have a first, second, third, and fourth in your respective between GTD Pro and GTD. That's pretty darn impressive. And yeah, those Ferraris looked very strong as the race went on. Reliability was essentially, spotless. Their record with that. But yeah, a lot of reliability and just a war of attrition out there in the GT classes. Certainly not what I was expecting. Not a great debut for Corvette and Ford. I think every single one of the Corvettes experienced some sort of a problem, and I think both the privateer ones didn't make it very far into the race. And then, of course, Ford as well experiencing some problems. So some gremlins to work out with those new GT cars, but I'm sure they'll get them sorted out. Their manufacturers like Ford and Chevrolet. They've both been here. They've both won these endurance races before. They know what they're doing. So they're gonna get that. They're gonna get those gremlins figured out, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned the privateer Corvettes. We didn't have to wait very long for one of the AWA Corvettes to run into trouble. Didn't even start up before the start of the race. They ended up getting out before the actual green flag dropped, but it was about a lap on pit road where they were just sitting stationary and didn't get moving at the start of the race.
Oh, and it came in multiple times, too, in that opening hour for whatever the issue was that they were experiencing.
Yep. Let's see. Going down the list here. Well, we weren't going to make it very far without talking about the 23 hours and 58 minutes of Daytona. Certainly wasn't helped by the fact that I was in the grandstands. Did have the fantastic IMSA radio in my trusty earpiece here, but that didn't really make it any less confusing of the fact that the checkered flag was waved 2 minutes before it was supposed to be. I remember the final lap of the race, sitting up in the grandstands again, high up above turn 1. John Heintel was saying it's the final lap of the race, and I was looking down at time, and I was like, there's 4 minutes to go, John.
Yeah.
3 or 4 minutes left. This is not the last lap of the race. Came around, and he got the checkered flag, and I was like, John, he did not get the checkered flag. There's a lap left. And then I looked at the timing, and it said checkered flag. Very weird one. We didn't really have any answers right after the race. I think that was probably the main talking point right after the race is what really caused that. IMSA came out with a statement the following day saying it was down to an officiating issue. I don't really know if we got anything more detailed than that, but certainly a weird one and not really something that we expected with a title sponsor like Rolex to have a bit of a timing glitch in a 24-hour race.
Yeah, no, it was not what it was a disappointing end to a great race. Ultimately, I don't think anything was really affected by it. I thought I heard some reports from some GT teams that we were holding off until the last lap to try and make a stab at somebody. How much truth is behind that is, we'll never really know. But the thing that I will say about it, though, because I don't know if IMSA's handled some of these situations the best in the past, not coming out with full explanations and just kind of letting it wither away into nothing as time goes on. But really good on them here to come out and clarify the following day, just own up to it that, there was an officiating error. A mistake was made that caused the race to end a lap short. At least we got that clarification from them. I was happy to see and hear that they had at least given us that. And we'll probably never ultimately know what the true cause of this was. Hopefully, if it was any mistake like this, I'm sure can be prevented. And hopefully there are some extra, I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but there's some extra fail safes that are put into place
Extra
to make sure
measures.
something like this doesn't happen again. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think lightning's going to strike twice with a weird glitch like this. At least I would hope not, especially at
Yeah.
their biggest race of the season. They got away pretty lucky with it because it would have been a hell of a lot more controversial if, say, the leading Porsche was like half a lap short on fuel, and then
Yep.
they waved the checkered flag a lap early. Like
Or
you
if
said,
the
I
top
think,
two were closer, they'd
yeah, if the
spread
top,
out a little bit at that point. So,
yeah, there's certainly it could have been a lot worse. Is
mhm.
what I'm trying to say. I really don't think, like you said, that it affected the outcome of the race. The number 7 Porsche actually ended up doing another full lap at full
Yeah.
speed, so kind of disproved any potential argument that they would have gone over their maximum stint energy or run out of fuel or something like that. But yeah, I think they got away lucky with that one, but it is definitely a weird glitch that hopefully doesn't pop up again in another endurance race, especially, like I said, at the Rolex 24. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to discuss from the race. Overall, I want to get some of your opinions. First 24-hour race for you, first major endurance race. If I'm right in saying the longest race you had been to before Daytona was 6 hours last year at Watkins Glen.
I believe so. I believe so. Yeah, definitely the first 24. And definitely the longest that I've been to in person. It's such a different experience than sitting and watching it at home. You mentioned making it easier, potentially to stay up and stay awake through the night. I think that's fair. Whether it's just the atmosphere, the sound, the excitement, whatever it might be, definitely it was a heck of a week, and it's unlike any other race that I've been to. I remember rolling off the highway and just you see Daytona emerge on the horizon, and how big the grandstands are, how big when you make it into the infield the track is. It's unlike anything else, and you definitely have to experience it. It's pretty incredible. As for the racing that was out on track, I mean, I thought this was a great race from start to finish. Maybe with the exception of some of the shenanigans that we had in sort of the opening third to a quarter of the race, that kind of took away a little bit from some of the battles that were slowly unfolding at that point. But the second half of this race, the battles that we saw in GTD Pro, GTD, LMP2, and then ultimately right down to the wire again in GTP, I think it really sets up what this season is gonna be. There's a ton of close racing that we're gonna have, and you can't fault the race. You can't say that the racing on track this year's Rolex was poor. It was exceptional this year, I thought.
Yeah, I thought it was a real true endurance race. It had
Yeah.
a bit of everything. It had war of attrition, like we saw in the GT categories, and I guess GTP as well. Had a lot of battles for the overall, and also class leads. And I think it's just provided a great show for us. The one thing I'll say is my picks completely rubbish. I think the best pick I had from pre-race was the 31 car I said would win. Very close, very strong final stint by Tom Blomqvist, but just came up a little bit short. And actually, one thing I wanted to talk about that I didn't mention yet. It's very interesting to me, that final stint, because ultimately the number 7 Porsche jumped the 31 Cadillac in the final pit stop. They had to put a little bit less fuel in the car. And I really thought that Tom would be able to draft up back by the number 7 car. It seemed like for the majority of the race, especially in the daytime hours, they had a little bit more pace,
Hmm.
and it just wasn't there. I don't really know what more there was to say about that. Both of those drivers, I think, in the final stint were at 100%. And that was one of the great things. I'm a little bit hesitant when we see a final hour restart in a 24-hour race, because sometimes it can feel a little bit manufactured and shake things up a little bit too much. At least it was for a good reason this time, with the
Yeah, the
Lexus on
fire.
fire and on the pit exit. Um, but ultimately, you can't fault either of the drivers at the front for putting out that performance. I think neither of them left really anything on the table, and ultimately, maybe traffic played its hand a little bit in the final laps. But yeah, just a little surprising to me that Tom was not able to draft up by the number 7 car at the finish.
It was kind of interesting too that Tom was in the car for that final stint. I guess in these races, you're just picking whoever the fastest driver is that you've had throughout the race for your closing stint. But the fact that Tom isn't a full season driver in that car, they have a pretty darn fast duo of drivers that are going to be in that car for the full season effort as well. So I guess I wouldn't say that I was surprised that. Well, I guess I was a little bit surprised that Tom was in the car for the end of that race. But given Tom's record at Daytona and just how top notch of a driver he is, it was you weren't going to go wrong picking Tom for the final stint. But it was a fun battle between those two cars at the end of the race.
Yeah. So closing thoughts from the race from me. Like I said, quintessential endurance race. Um, had everything that I needed to enjoy a 24-hour race. Got to go up in the Ferris wheel. Did you make it to the Ferris wheel, by the way?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
I know. I'll have
at least you
to.
got to see the fireworks.
Yeah, it's true. I'll have to do it next year. We weren't sure what time it was closing at, and we were up in the turn one grandstands to watch fireworks,
Yep.
and then we weren't sure, and we never ended up making it to the Ferris wheel.
Yeah, well, I have a fear of heights. So, but every year I throw myself on that damn Ferris wheel, and one of these years I'll realize that it's a stupid idea. But I will say, if you want to see the Le Mans chicane, it's probably your best opportunity as a general admission fan to go see the Le Mans chicane, because
That's true.
Daytona took down those grandstands on the back straightaway about 8 years ago or so. Um, Sad to hear TV viewership was 16% down from last year. I didn't see that personally.
Yeah.
So that's first time I'm hearing about that. I was actually going to mention that the highlights that I saw on YouTube were up about 200% from the amount of views they had from last year's race. So the one thing you have to realize with TV is, and I'm kind of curious how much viewership IMSA TV pulls in with the international audience. Those metrics are never really released. Neither are the streaming metrics from Peacock. And then the last thing with endurance races is the time slot is very dependent on how many views are actually counted for. Because if I'm not mistaken, and my knowledge of Nielsen ratings are not that great, but I'm pretty sure it's an average over the TV time slot and not the peak over the entire time slot, or not the peak over the entire time slot. Which is why like viewership at the 24 Hours of Le Mans last year on Motor Trend was pretty poor. It was competing with an average ARCA race in the United States, or even lower than that. But those were 6-hour broadcast windows on a cable channel that a lot of people don't have. So I try not to pay too much attention to it in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, just interesting to hear that it was down a little bit on TV.
Yeah, I can't remember. If they mentioned I know the article, I saw it, and I can't remember if they mentioned the Peacock viewing numbers in that. But Regardless, I know there were a lot of people, as there usually are, complaining about the ads on Peacock.
Yes.
So
Yes. I I guess it's a good thing that I go to Daytona every year now, because if not, I probably would have spent a little bit more time during this podcast complaining about NBC's coverage and blending in with 95% of the rest of the population.
true.
But yeah, I'm a little critical of their how they broadcast the 24, but not going to get into that right now. It was ominous how fast the Acura is, that it was able to finish third with all that weight. They would have been fighting for the win, I guess is what he was trying to say, if they didn't get BOP'd so hard. Yeah, I mean, Acura, like I said earlier, definitely was on the lower end of the stick this year, pace-wise. Um, it's great that they were able to get a podium out of that with the number 40 car. Ultimately, the 10 car had their reliability woes, was about halfway through the race, definitely some point at night.
I mean, the 40 had issues too, so
Yeah,
they were nursing some things as well. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the 40 car had similar issues, and I thought it was the same thing that hit the number 10 car.
Yeah.
And then ultimately just looked like they did a control alt delete on the car and was able to continue with that. That was right before I went to sleep, by the way. So,
Okay.
but yeah, it shows you how much of a race of attrition it was in GTP still. I mean, keep your nose relatively clean, stay out of trouble, and don't spend too much time in the pits of the garage, and you're going to wind up in the podium. And I think that that's what we saw out of Acura. The two cars with, well, no, I shouldn't say that, because there were other cars that had a cleaner race than Acura. We mentioned earlier how all the Porsches really stayed out of trouble for the most part, but with the way that IMSA safety car rules work, and staying on the lead lap is just really the big thing. If you can stay on the lead lap, you can try to stay in the hunt. But yeah, it was great to see that they were able to at least hold on to third in that final green flag stint at the end of the race.
Mm-hmm.
I think with Aston Martin, Lamborghini, and potentially Alpine joining GTP, 25 will be even more amazing. Yeah. Definitely the number one thing that I think a lot of people are looking at right now is how much bigger the race can be next year, with the addition of Lamborghini, which we'll be seeing on track for the first time. Well, WEC at Qatar, but first time in IMSA at the next race out at Sebring. And I don't really think we have to speak too much to how much interest that car and a V12 powered Aston Martin and potentially an Alpine as well could bring to the 24. And if I'm a betting man, you could probably bet on the 2025 Daytona 24 having an even higher attendance than we saw this year. So
Yeah.
maybe another record-setting year next year.
Which is wild to believe.
And the only other question it looks like we got is, did Jensen only do one stint? And to that question, I have absolutely no idea. I would have to go look at the stint analysis over on results.imsa.com. They're posted by Alchemel Timing, and it sounds like you might be doing that right now. But from my side, just off the dome, I'm not sure how many stints Jensen actually did. I assume stint meaning one run in the car, not just one pit stint.
It does appear that it was only one stint. Looks like he did a triple stint, and that was it.
Yep. What time of the race was that?
This was oh boy, I don't know, 20, 21, 24. This had to be at the very beginning of the race.
21 hours left in the race, or 21 was the time?
It's a good question.
If it was 21, it might have been at night. That would have been like 9:30ish.
Oh yeah, okay. Start time was 9:30. End time was 11:30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it looks like we'll got one more question. What are the odds that Reese gets a 499P? Do we think that more GTPs cause an issue for LMP2 entries? Couple of interesting questions there. Reese was talking a little bit over the 24 weekend about 499P. I think it was first brought up at Petit Le Mans back in 2022 that he mentioned he would be interested in trying that at some point. I think there are two main concerns for it. Number one, financial. You have to make sure that you're going to be able to run that car. financially, but then also customer support from Ferrari. We're seeing a customer 499P in the WEC this year, albeit being run by AF Course, who's also running the factory outfit. So, how much interest Ferrari has in actually offering that car up to US based customer teams, it's a bit of a wait and see. I would love to see it, a Ferrari competing for the overall win at the 24 hours. Keep talking about how to pile more interest onto that race.
Yeah.
And then also, GTP is causing an issue for LMP2 entries. It's definitely something that's going to get brought up. We're pretty much at a capacity grid right now at Daytona, and with the addition of, I could say, at least 3 to 5 GTP cars on the grid next year, it's going to be something that gets brought up, whether that detracts from the GTD entries that we have or the LMP2 entries. Ultimately, that's sort of why LMP3 was forced off the grid, is just with the uptick of interest in some of the other categories. I personally hope that it doesn't affect the LMP2 category. I think there's definitely a spot for that class, for Pro-Am drivers to be able to contest that race. But curious to see how that'll affect the race and the series as a whole, I guess, for the future.
Yeah, I think LMP2 has been such an ingrained part of IMSA for so long that I, I certainly would hope that they wouldn't flat out get rid of it. Perhaps you have to look at a slight reduction in entries, in the LMP2 class, maybe in the GTD class, but I mean, ultimately, it'll probably boil down to just more entries, committing to at least an endurance cup schedule, and basically 0 one-off Rolex entries.
Right. That's
But
what I was thinking.
yeah, they would definitely go and prioritize, full season Michelin Endurance Cup entries. So that might be ultimately what it boils down to. Just anybody that's looking, I think Dragon Speed actually announced that they're going to do more races, if I'm not mistaken. But Dragon Speed is one that comes to mind. They just got added in at the last second for the Rolex, but you might not see any more of those one-off entries anymore.
Yep, I was thinking the exact same thing. Dragon Speed is confirmed to be doing the entire Michelin Endurance Cup this year.
Perfect.
But that's pretty much what I would expect, something along those lines as well. We already see that with the WEC, where the teams that run the full season are given priority over those one-offs at Le Mans. I think a similar system would probably play in here as well. And we see a ton of one-offs in the GTD category as well. So I think that those are the two classes where we're probably going to, naturally, those are the two classes where we would probably see a bit of a hit. As I've said in the past, it's a nice issue for sports car racing to have, where there's too much interest, but a nice issue to have is still an issue nonetheless. All right, I think that's enough to move on from Daytona. I got a couple tidbits of news to go over. Not a massive amount given how much sports car racing news usually gets piled on, especially around a race weekend, but this year we seem to have escaped a lot of that. First thing I want to talk about is the Peugeot 9X8, which will be running the 2023 spec on the opening round in Qatar in early March. The 2024 spec is scheduled to be on track for the debut at Imola. They've already been testing that car. It was spotted at Paul Ricard in late December. The changes that are expected around that car, most notably the introduction of a rear wing, and then also the tires for that car are being changed. Right now they're running 31 centimeter tires across the entire car. They're going to be switching that around to have 29 centimeter tires in the front and 34 centimeter tires in the rear, which I believe mimics the tire specification that all of the other cars run in the hypercar category. Offset of that is it will also affect the minimum speed that they're able to deploy the hybrid energy to the front wheels to, I believe it's 190 kilometers per hour, whereas they were previously running, I think, 150. Or maybe they even dropped it to 135 in recent rounds, but they definitely were deploying that energy to the front wheels quicker than the other 4-wheel drive hypercars just because they were running those skinnier tires in the rear. I think that's all I have for the 9X8 story. We also got a couple driver lineup announcements for the WEC, most notably from Iron Lynx and also from WRT. So for the number 60 Iron Lynx Lamborghini, we have Claudio Schiavone, Matteo Cresoni, and Frank Pereira, the longtime Lamborghini driver, bringing up that lineup. And in the Iron Dames number 83, bit of a surprise on this one, I think, with Dorian Pan being announced as the third full-time driver for that car, replacing Rahal Fry. I believe will be continuing in a management role for the Iron Dames number 83 team, and then also racing in that car alongside Dorian are the return of Sarah Bovey and Michelle Gadding. In the 31 WRT BMW M4 GT3 Evo, Augusto Farfus, Sean Galeo, and Darren Lung, who's coming over from British GT.
Wait, it's not an Evo yet. It's not an Evo yet.
Oh, 2025, that's right. That's when we're getting the Evo of that car. And then in the 46 WRT, non-Evo BMW, Valentino Rossi, notable headliner for that car, being put up alongside BMW factory driver Maxime Martin and Ahmed Al-Hardy in that car. And then the final piece of driver news from the WEC that I was able to pick up on. Well, actually, there's a couple things. The Heart of Racing Aston Martin lineup was confirmed as well. No changes to that lineup. But the number 2 Cadillac that will be running, that Soul Cadillac from Chip Ganassi Racing in the WEC, will have Sebastian Bourdais in the car as the third driver for the, get ready for it, 1,812 kilometers, also known as 10 hours of Qatar, because that race will not go for 1,812 kilometers. And likely going to see Renger van der Zande in that car for the 8 hours of Bahrain, the season finale. Just a couple of drivers, or a third driver to put in the car for those longer endurance races that we have. And then also, this is something that got picked up around the Daytona 24 weekend, was that we might see Alex Palou racing in that car for Le Mans in the number 2 car. Obviously, Richard Westbrook was the third driver in that car last year, now is racing for Porsche. Proton Porsche should specify. So we'll be seeing potentially Alex Palou in that car for the number 3 lineup if they return to Le Mans this year. That's all I got to go over for the driver announcements. Also, though, we got a story on the IMSA side of things. Well, I guess it's IMSA and WEC, but I'll let you take that one, Stu.
Sure. So a little bit of exciting news. I mean, it's not confirmed 100% yet, but there was a SportsCar 365 article put out last week by John DeGeese on the possibility of Lamborghini running 2 SC63 entries at COTA and at the Indy rounds. Of course, COTA being the Lone Star Le Mans round for the WEC, and then, of course, Indy's 6-hour battle on the bricks. It makes a bit of sense here. So it's of course at the end of the summer. It's after the 24 hours of Le Mans, which Lamborghini have already committed to a 2-car entry for. In considering this 2-car effort for the Lone Star Le Mans and the Battle of the Bricks, it was mentioned, at least I'll give a quote from Giorgio Senna in a second, but it's kind of expected that it would be more for just increased mileage on the car. Of course, they lost a little bit of mileage over last summer, as when they were testing, and they had that crash at Paul Ricard. So maybe, I mean, this probably isn't being affected by that, but just trying to gather as much data as they can in race conditions to prepare them for potentially an increased effort in the 2025 season. But Lamborghini head of motorsport Giorgio Senna said, "At this moment, it's not our priority to do the 2-car entries in these races. But if we do need more mileage, then this would be the chance to do it. So, I mean, we don't know for sure whether we're going to see it. There's definitely no guarantees there that we're going to see 2 entries at Indy and at Circuit of the Americas. But that would be great to see a couple of Lamborghinis and in a couple of those big races. So fingers crossed on that one. And just a sort of note on the SC63 as well. It has been successfully homologated for both racing in the WEC and IMSA this year. So they're all set. They have that box checked. And we're going to see them at Qatar and then shortly after in Sebring.
Yeah, like you said, it lines up great for them to be able to run 2 6-hour endurance races stateside with that car. It would be a great addition to both series for WC and IMSA. If they're actually able to put that second car in the grid for both of those enduros, me personally, I would love to see it because I'm provisionally planning on going to the 6 hours of COTA in early September. So we'll see if that ends up coming to fruition, but hopefully.
Oh, it's Lone Star Le Mans.
Is it officially branded as Lone Star Le Mans again? I thought on the calendar it was the 6 hours of COTA.
It wouldn't be the first time we've gone against what
race at COTA. Yeah, it's a 6-hour endurance race at COTA. I don't care what you call it.
I mean, you do call it the bus stop still, not the Le Mans chicane. So,
yeah, I'm not one of those like anti-Le Mans chicane people. All right, I'll call it if they want me to call it the Le Mans chicane, I'll call it that. It's just sometimes old habits don't die.
I mean, yeah.
Got a couple questions, and I will say that I think we've covered everything that we wanted to cover on the show. So if you want to get any questions in, now would be the time to do it. But a little bit of talking going on about the customer Ferrari 499Ps and the reasoning behind them. Tara said officially the WEC says 2 factory cars only. Ferrari should be pressed on that rule harder so that Risi can get a car. I think it should have pressed on that rule harder so Risi can get a car. So yeah, that is true. They are only allowed 2 factory cars full time in the or a maximum of 2 cars full time in the WEC in the hypercar category. That's where there's a little bit of not confusion, but it's a little bit of a gray area that the third AF course entry, which they did say is running as a separate outfit. And I do believe them on that, but it's just, you're not gonna beat the butt of my jokes here by having a customer racing team under the same team as the factory outfit. But yeah, I could see why that might be a reason for some of those manufacturers to push for more customer teams, not just Ferrari. But ultimately, Ferrari's very particular about where they actually want that car to be run. Toyota's in a similar boat right now with not being quite as, not quite as friendly with customer programs as, or not as open with customer racing programs as a manufacturer like Porsche would be. But so again, I'll say what I said earlier. I'd love to see them in IMSA, at least for the endurance races with a 499P under Risi Competizione, but we'll have to see how Ferrari wants to take that information. Maybe
they're just scared of the Rolex, Let's just call them out. Maybe somebody from Ferrari will see this or Toyota will see this and just light a fire under them. Probably not.
That's what people have said about Toyota for years now. I guess 2 years since they were actually allowed to start running that race. Is Toyota needs to come over and run Daytona, and Toyota's, to my knowledge, never really expressed any interest of running the 24.
Which is kind of wild, considering they do have a pretty big footprint here in the North American auto market. But I guess it's a lot. It would be a lot to put together a program for just one race too. So.
Right. I mean, that's what it boils down to is Toyota's racing efforts are largely separated, similar to what we had with Honda. Now, Honda is all operating under the HRC Global banner now, where they have HRC US. But previously, you had HRC, which was handling more of the worldwide side of things, F1, MotoGP, Super Formula. And then you had HPD, which was Honda Performance Development. handling the IMSA side of things, the IndyCar side of things, and they sort of operated as separate entities. And that's why I think there was not really a big push to have the Acura ARX 06 racing at Le Mans, for instance. Now we're seeing a bit of change of tide with that, where it looks like we might potentially see that car on the grid next year at Le Mans. Toyota, though, they're still sort of operating under those separate entities right now, and I think that's pretty much the main reason why we haven't seen them here at the 24 Hours of Daytona. Do teams
Wait, are we saying that big corporations don't communicate well internally with one another? No, I don't believe
I'm
it.
not saying that. Do factory teams running LMDH have any side effects of helping the LMP2 manufacturers to improve their version of the car? I'd like to see the Class B less Formula Oreca. It's an interesting question, and it's one that definitely takes place more now with the GTP cars than we had with the DPI cars that came before. Same philosophy for the most part, except the DPI cars were introduced at the exact same time as the new LMP2 cars, whereas the new LMP2 cars now, they've been delayed multiple times. I think they're now not on track for debut until 2026, I think.
Yeah,
was
I
the
think
last time they were delayed.
I think they're good through the end of 25, so.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if it really affects the chassis development of those cars all too much, because I think there's too many other factors within the GTP cars at play. You have to manage the actual balance of that car with the engine that the manufacturers put on and the aero that they have. So I wouldn't say it plays a massive part. But also, with the note of the class being less Formula Oreca in the future, with the new LMP2 regulations, there is a new system being put in place. At least this is what was communicated to us when they introduced the new formula of LMP2 cars. I believe the acronym for this one is AOP or something like that.
Oh boy.
Like adjustment of performance. It's BOP. Let's not kid ourselves. Where they would essentially adjust the weight, I believe. I believe it's just the weight of the cars, potentially also aero parameters as well, but it's been so long since I've read up on it, where not before every single race, but at least a couple times a season, they would have the ability to adjust the performance of those cars across the board, so that way it doesn't become a single make class like we're seeing right now. And unfortunately, Sean Creech Motorsports did not do the greatest performance at the Rolex 24 to help alleviate that issue that we have, but with their Ligier JSP 217.
Yeah, that was rough.
But I'm interested to see how that actually affects the class when we do get those new LMP2 regulations. And then also continuing on with what we were talking about earlier, do you think LMP2 is in danger of being dropped from IMSA as soon as 2025? I'm trying to remember if during the race I heard IMSA radio discuss that or not, because something's telling me that it was at least brought up as a possibility. But again, I can't remember distinctly. I don't think it's been a big talking point so far. I think definitely in the WEC that was more of a talking point than it is with IMSA. IMSA seems like they have more classes or more cars running on the grids for the most part than the WEC has. So I haven't heard anything of it being dropped, but that's something I'd have to look into.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not overly concerned about it being dropped after. I feel like if it was a serious possibility of being dropped next year, we might start to see the trickle down effects of that this year, with maybe you don't see all of those LMP3 teams jump into LMP2. Maybe you see more of them go to a GTD or something like that, because let's be real, these discussions don't just happen overnight. There is lead up to that, but yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty confident that I think LMP2 will be on the grid for until the new cycle of cars comes in.
Right. And if we were to hear anything on that, I would expect around the summer. Around the state of the series is probably when you would hear more official news related to that.
Although we heard LMP2 get dropped like right after Sebring, I think last year it was. Whether that was leaked
for
information or not, too.
for the WEC.
No, it's our LMP3 getting
Oh,
dropped from IMSA.
LMP3. Okay.
Was around after Sebring, I think.
Yeah, it was earlier in the season.
Because they would want to give plenty of lead
Yeah.
up for teams to be able to solidify plans for the following season as well. So
Yeah.
we'll have to wait and see, I suppose.
I hate saying wait and see, but that's
Yeah.
ultimately what it boils down to because I unfortunately don't have the insider knowledge that some of the more seasoned IMSA, well, I'm not an IMSA journalist, but some of the proper IMSA journalists would have. I also have a love-hate relationship with 24-hour races. I never get to be at the track as much as I want to having to take care of family members' needs. Well, first of all, I hope that everything goes well with that side. There's hopefully no concerns. But yeah, I will, as I said earlier, I love being at the track for 24-hour races, except for that 3 to 5 a.m. period. If I can eliminate that part, usually I'm all right. And then, the safety car is the best part to sleep at during the first half of the race. And I said the same thing about Le Mans last year with how long those safety car periods were, but then ultimately that safety car sleep turned into an 8-hour nap instead. So I'm never as good at timing those as I want to admit.
Got your full 8 hours.
What do you guys think of the C8Z06? I guess what's that car officially called now? The Corvette Z06 GT3R or something?
Yeah.
Okay. And
You
the
nailed it.
Mustang GT3. So, as I said earlier, they both had disappointing debuts. I wouldn't say entirely unexpected debuts. I was more surprised at how much Corvette struggled during the race than Ford, because the Corvette at least is building off the philosophy of a car that they were running previously, whereas the Ford is an all-new car. And on the opposite end, I thought that Ford fared a little bit better than I thought initially that they might. There were parts of the race where they were definitely competitive, and for the most part, I think that they were a little bit more reliable than I was thinking they'd be in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Definitely agree on surprised at how many of the Corvettes failed over the course of the race. It sounded like coming out of the roar before the 24 that Ford was a little bit surprised. They were trying to make it. There was an article. One of the drivers was talking about how they were shocked at how the other cars picked up so much pace going into that qualifying session, and Ford had a bit of a disappointing session. But I don't know. It was disappointing that they had the reliability issues for both manufacturers. But at the end of the day, it's their first test in a 24-hour race. You can test all that you want, or their first race in their first 24-hour race. You can test all that you want, but you can't really replicate those the race battles in those conditions for 24 hours. It's pretty difficult to do that. So, I don't know. I think look at how Ferrari did this year. Ferrari was in the same boat that both these manufacturers were in last year. They got a year under their belt with that car. They won some big races along the way, not long after the Rolex 24. And I would expect to see the Ford or the Corvette winning some big races at some point this season. So sure, it's a disappointing start to those cars' lives, I guess, but they'll be back strong, and maybe as soon as Sebring. I mean, who knows? Sebring, we saw BMW turn it around really quickly last year for Sebring and GTP. The one thing I will say, and a bit of a different spin on what I thought of those two cars, I was disappointed in the sound of the Corvette. I thought that it sounds worse than it did. It sounded great. It was arguably the best sounding car on the grid, I thought, last year. It does not sound the same anymore. And the Mustang is, I think, easily the best sounding car in the GT classes. I don't know if you have any opinions on that, but that was my opinion on it.
That's interesting. I didn't really notice a big difference with the Corvette. I mean, obviously, I'd have to hear them back to back. The last time I heard
Yeah.
it was, I guess the last IMSA race, the Petit Le Mans. Um, but I didn't really pick up on that. But now I'll have to go watch a YouTube video to see what you're talking about. And the Mustang, yeah, definitely one of the crowd favorites sound wise. I'm always a sucker for a Lamborghini V10, but it's definitely up there. Some of the best sounding GT3 cars in IMSA right now. And just to spin that question in a different direction, because I really talked about what I thought about their performances at Daytona. What I think about them actually being on the grid, it was fantastic to see the return of Corvette, or I guess Chevy versus Mustang in the GT ranks at Daytona. There are a lot of fans who get very invested in GT racing because obviously that has the most similarity to the cars that they're driving into the track, maybe. And I think that played a hand into why we saw a record attendance at Daytona this year. And I think that last year, tough as it may sound, GT racing sort of sat on the back burner. Everybody was talking about the GTP category and the fight for the overall win. But this year, there were a lot more storylines with the GTD and GTD Pro classes, and it was great to see the return of those manufacturer rivalries, because I think that when you do end up at a GT only race at VIR later this season, it's going to be a little bit more worth tuning into and seeing who's going to fight for the overall win at that race.
That it will. And Detroit. And Detroit. Well, that's not a GT only race.
Yeah.
But that one's with it being the home of.
Yeah, with it being the home, right.
Yeah.
And I think, I'll tell you what, it's a bit of a shorter episode, but I think that's enough to cover it for this one. I got all the questions to my knowledge answered. If not, feel free to yell at me and I'll try to get to it in the next episode, which is supposed to be in 2 weeks' time. We are sort of back into the off season now, unfortunately, with the way that IMSA races, or the IMSA calendar is structured, where we have to wait another 6 or 7 weeks after Daytona for the 12 hours of Sebring. And about a month's time from now, we have, again, the 1,812 kilometers of Qatar, 10 hours of Qatar.
We have the prologue before that, too, February 24th and 25th. That's only
we do have
that's
the prologue.
2.5 weeks away.
Yep. Yeah, we do have that to discuss, but just in terms of the next race that we'll see these cars on track. In the introduction of Lamborghini, we'll have plenty to talk about in the coming weeks. So, thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Like I said, hope to see you all in 2 weeks' time, and have a good night, day, whatever time you're listening to this episode. Thanks for watching.
Rolex brain.